opens with a slow pan across a misty Mississippi field at dusk, soybeans swaying in the breeze. A faint, eerie sound of creaking wood echoes, as if from a long-forgotten barn. The narrator's voice is low, deliberate, and intense. In the summer of 1846, a leather-bound ledger was sealed and hidden in the basement of the Adams County Courthouse in Natchez, Mississippi. For 112 years, it sat untouched, gathering dust in the dark. When county workers pried it open during a renovation in 1958, they uncovered 73 pages of meticulous records, daily entries documenting a nightmare that unfolded over 5 months. The final entry, dated November 9, 1846, consisted of just 4 words: "The treatment is concluded." This is the story of Margaret Holloway, a 23-year-old woman who dared to defy her father, one of the wealthiest plantation owners in Mississippi. It's the story of 3 enslaved men, Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel, forced to carry out a cruel plan to break her spirit. It's a story of a barn that became a prison, of impossible choices made in the face of unimaginable cruelty, and of a fire that ended it all. This isn't just history, it's a truth they tried to bury, locked away in a courthouse basement, burned to ash in a forgotten barn, whispered only in family stories passed down through generations. If you're someone who craves the stories history doesn't teach, who wants to uncover the dark truths hidden in forgotten archives, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to know what really happened. Drop a comment with your city or state. Are you from Mississippi? Have you heard whispers of stories like this in your own community? Let's step back to 1846, to Riverbend Plantation, where this nightmare began. Riverbend Plantation stretched across 2,000 acres of rich Mississippi soil, 12 miles north of Natchez, along the Mississippi River. In 1846, it was a thriving operation, producing cotton, tobacco, and vegetables, worked by 137 enslaved people. At its center stood Edmund Holloway, a 51-year-old widower revered as the most moral man in Adams County. He attended First Presbyterian Church every Sunday, taught Bible study on Wednesdays, and donated generously to the church's missionary fund and the local orphanage. He had funded most of a new school building in Natchez, earning admiration as a model Christian gentleman. Neighbors turned to him for loans in tough times, and he extended credit with generous terms. To the outside world, Edmund was a pillar of virtue, a man whose life embodied godly order. But beneath this polished image, Riverbend was a place of iron control. Edmund had inherited the plantation in 1823 at age 28 after his father's death. He married Sarah Chandler, a quiet woman from a prominent Charleston family who brought a substantial dowry. Their daughter, Margaret, was born in 1823, followed by a son, Edmund Jr., in 1826. Tragedy struck when Edmund Jr. died of fever before his 2nd birthday. Sarah withdrew, spending her days in her room reading scripture and writing letters to missionaries abroad. By 1839, when Margaret was 16, Sarah died, officially of fever, though whispers suggested she had simply faded away, her spirit broken by grief. Edmund mourned publicly, wearing black for a year and commissioning a marble monument for her grave. No one questioned his devotion as a husband. After Sarah's death, Edmund's focus shifted to Margaret, his only surviving child and heir. At 23, Margaret was his greatest disappointment. She had always been a challenging child, asking too many questions, reading books deemed unsuitable for young ladies, and expressing opinions when silence was expected. As she grew older, her defiance deepened. By 1845, she weighed over 200 pounds, a source of shame for Edmund in a society that prized delicate femininity. But her weight was secondary to her real offense. Margaret had a mind of her own and refused to hide it. Edmund had ensured Margaret received an excellent education, hiring tutors in literature, history, French, and music, and granting her access to his extensive library. He believed this would make her an appealing wife for a wealthy suitor. Instead, it made her dangerous. Margaret read Mary Wollstonecraft and abolitionist newspapers smuggled into Mississippi despite bans. She formed her own views on slavery, women's roles, and society's structure, and she spoke them aloud. In 1843, at a dinner party hosted by Edmund, she shocked guests by challenging a planter's defense of slavery, suggesting it corrupted the souls of those who practiced it. The room fell silent, and Edmund ended the evening early, blaming Margaret's outburst on fatigue. In private, he forbade her from speaking on such topics again. Margaret apologized, but her father knew she wasn't sincere. Over the next 2 years, Margaret's defiance grew. She was overheard asking enslaved house servants about their families, giving food to children in the quarters, and teaching a young enslaved girl to read, a crime in Mississippi. Edmund tried to curb her behavior, restricting her to religious texts, limiting her interactions with enslaved workers, and arranging suitors. Between 1843 and 1845, 4 men proposed to Margaret. She rejected them all, citing reasons from poor manners to cruelty, though Edmund suspected she simply didn't want to marry. She told him she'd rather be an old maid than marry a man she didn't respect, that she could manage her own life without a husband. To Edmund, this was intolerable. His reputation as a moral authority depended on a household that reflected order. Margaret's rebellion threatened that image. By early 1846, Edmund was desperate. Margaret's behavior was becoming a public embarrassment, raising questions about his authority and judgment. Neighbors whispered that her defiance reflected his failings as a father. He couldn't allow this to continue. In May 1846, Edmund traveled to New Orleans, ostensibly for business with cotton factors and bankers, but his real purpose was darker. He met with overseers and slave breakers, men skilled in crushing the spirits of enslaved people who showed resistance. He described Margaret's defiance and sought their advice on breaking her without visible marks or public scandal. They recommended a regimen of physical labor, isolation, unpredictable treatment, and humiliation, methods designed to destroy will and enforce compliance. The process needed to appear legitimate, like medical therapy, to avoid questions. Edmund returned to Riverbend on May 26 with a plan. He chose the large barn behind the main house, a 60 by 40-foot structure used for storing equipment. He had enslaved workers clear it out, leaving only what was needed for Margaret's treatment. He installed heavy locks on the doors, embedded hooks in the support beams, and brought in a grain mill requiring constant physical effort to operate. A thin mattress in one corner served as a sleeping area. Edmund set up a desk for himself, where he would document everything in a leather-bound ledger. He selected 3 enslaved men to oversee Margaret's daily routine. Benjamin, a 38-year-old field hand with a wife, Ruth, and 3 children. Samuel, a 27-year-old stable worker born on the plantation. And Daniel, a 33-year-old carpenter who could read and write, a skill that made him both useful and potentially dangerous. Edmund summoned the 3 men to his study on June 13. He explained that Margaret required treatment for her condition, involving rigorous labor and strict discipline. They were to treat her like a field worker, showing no mercy or kindness, and record her behavior, weight, and compliance in the ledger. Benjamin asked what would happen if they refused. Edmund's response was chilling. Benjamin's family would be sold separately to different plantations in the Deep South, never to see each other again. Samuel and Daniel received similar threats. The men were trapped, forced to choose between destroying a woman or losing their families. That night, Benjamin told Ruth, who begged him to refuse. He explained that running would lead to capture and Margaret would still suffer. At least by participating, he might mitigate her pain. Samuel and Daniel had similar anguished conversations with loved ones. None wanted this role, but they saw no alternative. On June 14, Edmund brought Margaret to the barn without warning. She wore her oldest clothes as instructed and followed him, confused but not yet alarmed. Inside, she saw Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel, the grain mill and the sparse sleeping area. "What is this?" she asked. "Your treatment," Edmund replied calmly. "You've proven incapable of governing yourself. You've embarrassed me and our family. For the next several months, you'll live here, work under these men's supervision, and learn discipline and obedience." Margaret's shock turned to anger. "This is insane. You can't imprison your own daughter and force her to work like a slave." Edmund's expression didn't waver. "I am your father. The law supports me. You'll do as I say or it will be worse." He gestured to the 3 men. "They are your supervisors. Obey them or face consequences." He left, locking the door behind him. Margaret stood frozen, her world unraveling. Benjamin spoke quietly. "Miss Margaret, we don't want to do this, but if we don't follow orders, people we love will suffer. Please cooperate so this can be as easy as possible." Margaret realized the truth. Her father was serious, and these men were as trapped as she was. With no other option, she walked to the grain mill and began pushing the heavy wooden arm. Within minutes, her arms ached. Within half an hour, she was exhausted. But stopping meant confronting the reality of her imprisonment, and she wasn't ready for that. Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel watched in silence, their role as enforcers weighing heavily. Visual fades to black. Narrator's voice returns, urgent. If this story is already gripping you, if you feel the weight of Margaret's first day in that barn, hit that like button to support this deep dive into history's shadows. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. In the comments, tell me, what would you do in Margaret's place, facing a father who sees you as property? Let's keep going, things are about to get darker. The days in the barn blurred into a grueling routine. Margaret woke before dawn, worked the grain mill for hours, hauled water for the stables, and performed other tasks Benjamin assigned. She ate simple meals of cornbread and beans, rations like those given to enslaved workers, twice daily. She slept on the thin mattress, her body aching, her mind numb. Edmund visited regularly, weighing her weekly and recording her behavior in the ledger. By late June, Margaret had lost over 20 pounds. Her hands were calloused, her muscles constantly sore. Exhaustion dulled her thoughts, making resistance impossible. Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel struggled with their roles. They were forced to oversee a white woman, the master's daughter, enduring treatment that mirrored their own lives of forced labor. They tried small acts of kindness. Benjamin allowed longer rest breaks when Edmund wasn't there, Samuel brought extra water on hot days, and Daniel offered quiet encouragements. But these gestures couldn't change the reality. They were complicit in breaking Margaret's spirit. By late July, Margaret's defiance faded. She worked without protest, spoke little, and cried only at night when she thought no one could hear. Edmund's ledger noted her transformation. July 28, 1846. Subject's weight down to 202 pounds. Compliance automatic. No verbal resistance in past week. Emotional affect flattened. Increase work to maintain progress. Edmund's satisfaction grew, but he wanted more. In August, he introduced new elements to the treatment. Some days Margaret worked to collapse, others she received lighter tasks with no explanation. Meals varied unpredictably, sometimes adequate, sometimes half portions. Edmund accused her of invented infractions, like working too slowly or showing disrespect, punishing her with extra labor or reduced food. The goal was to strip away her sense of control, to make her believe her actions didn't matter. Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel hated this phase. Gaslighting Margaret with false accusations and arbitrary punishments felt like a new level of cruelty. They saw her confusion and despair deepen, and it mirrored their own powerlessness. But something unexpected began to happen. Margaret started to see the three men not as her father's enforcers, but as fellow victims. She noticed their discomfort when delivering punishments, their averted eyes when Edmund was present. She realized they were trapped by the same system that caged her, just in different ways. The men, in turn, began to see Margaret differently, not as the privileged master's daughter, but as a woman suffering under cruelty they all understood. Pain, they realized, didn't respect the lines society drew between them. One evening in mid-August, after Edmund left, Benjamin sat near Margaret as she rested, exhausted from 8 hours at the mill. After a long silence, he said, "I'm sorry for all of this, for what we have to do." Margaret looked up surprised. "Why are you doing it?" she asked. Benjamin explained the threats against his family. Margaret nodded. "I'm not angry at you, you're as trapped as I am." That moment of understanding shifted something. They began to talk, whispered conversations when Edmund wasn't around. Daniel shared how literacy had opened his mind to ideas of justice, yet trapped him in a world where he couldn't act on them. Samuel spoke of his mother, sold away when he was 8, her fate unknown. Margaret told them about her mother's death, the suffocating expectations on women, and the books that made her believe in freedom for herself and others. These talks were dangerous, but they forged a bond, a shared recognition of their humanity in a system that denied it. Visual, a close-up of Margaret's calloused hands on the grain mill, sweat on her brow, fading to the three men watching her, their faces heavy with guilt. This story is heavy, isn't it? If it's hitting you hard, if you're seeing the humanity in these impossible choices, share this video with someone who needs to understand. Hit that like button to keep these stories alive. In the comments, tell me, what do you think of Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel's small acts of kindness? Were they enough, or just drops in an ocean of cruelty? Let's see what happens next, because the barn is about to become something even worse. By September, Margaret had been in the barn for nearly 3 months. She'd lost 50 pounds, her body lean and hardened by labor. But the real change was in her spirit. The defiant, opinionated Margaret was nearly gone, replaced by someone quiet, compliant, focused only on surviving each day. Edmund's plan was working too well, yet he showed no signs of ending the treatment. Why? Daniel, who could read and had access to the main house for carpentry work, decided to find out. On September 8, while repairing a window frame, he slipped into Edmund's study. In an unlocked drawer, he found a small leather journal, not the treatment ledger, but something far worse. The journal detailed a breeding program Edmund had run for over a decade. It listed enslaved women forced to bear children with men chosen for their strength and health, producing offspring Edmund sold or used as laborers. Near the end, Edmund wrote of a new plan. His breeding program was faltering as women aged. Buying new ones was costly. But Margaret, his healthy, strong daughter, could produce valuable children if paired with enslaved men. Her offspring would be legally enslaved, under Edmund's control to sell or keep. To make this work, he needed her utterly broken, compliant enough to accept this horrific fate. The barn wasn't about marriage, it was about turning Margaret into breeding stock. Daniel felt sick. He returned the journal and told Benjamin and Samuel that evening. They were horrified but not shocked. Such programs weren't uncommon on large plantations, but targeting his own daughter was monstrous. Margaret had to know. That night, after Edmund left, Daniel told her everything. Margaret listened, her face pale, and said only, "We leave tomorrow night." The escape plan they'd been quietly forming was incomplete, but waiting was no longer an option. Knowing Edmund's true intent made staying unbearable. Benjamin told Ruth, explaining the risks. She cried but understood some things were worth dying for. Samuel and Daniel gathered supplies, food, a knife, rope. The plan was to flee north to the Mississippi River, then follow it toward free territory. It was dangerous with low odds of success, but possibility was enough. On September 9, the day began like any other. Margaret worked the mill, Edmund visited to weigh her, noting she'd lost 61 pounds. He wrote that her physical transformation was nearly complete, and the next phase would soon begin. After he left, the men kept their routine normal to avoid suspicion. At 9:00 p.m., Benjamin started a fire in a storage shed on the plantation's eastern edge, shouting for help to draw attention. As overseers and Edmund rushed to fight the blaze, Samuel and Daniel unlocked the barn and led Margaret into the woods. Benjamin joined them after slipping away. They moved through the night, navigating by stars, avoiding roads. By dawn, they'd covered 8 miles and hid in a dense grove. Pursuit began at sunrise, with dogs and search parties scouring the area. For 3 days, they traveled at night, hid by day, and evaded capture. By September 12, they'd covered over 20 miles, exhausted but free. Hope flickered. But on the 4th night, September 13, their luck ran out. Dogs picked up their scent, barking closer than ever. The 4 ran, crashing through underbrush, no longer hiding their tracks. Ahead, Margaret spotted a barn on an isolated farm, smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney. It was risky, but the dogs were seconds away. They rushed inside, barring the door. Through gaps in the walls, they saw torches and heard Edmund's voice. "Margaret, come out now, and I'll show mercy. Stay, and I'll burn the barn with you in it." There was no other exit. They were trapped. Margaret walked to the door. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. She opened the door slightly and faced Edmund, 20 feet away, torch in hand. "Father, let these men go. They didn't want to help me escape. I forced them." Edmund laughed. "They'll face punishment, as will you come out." Margaret realized obedience meant returning to the nightmare, to Edmund's breeding plan, while Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel faced death or sale. She made her choice. Margaret grabbed Edmund's torch and ran back inside, dropping it onto the dry hay. Flames erupted, racing up the walls. She barred the door, locking them in. "Why?" Benjamin asked, stunned. "Because this way we choose," Margaret said. "We die together on our terms, denying him what he wanted." Samuel nodded, coughing in the smoke. Daniel took Margaret's hand, then Samuel. Benjamin completed the circle. They stood together as the barn burned, dying from smoke inhalation before the flames reached them, connected in defiance. Edmund broke through the door too late. He pulled 4 bodies from the ruins, staring at Margaret's burned corpse, feeling an emotion he couldn't name, grief, rage, or shame. He told neighbors she died in a fire during a kidnapping by enslaved men. He buried her with a marble headstone and sealed the ledger in the courthouse basement. Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel were buried in unmarked grave. Their families told they died escaping. Ruth and her children were sold to Louisiana. But the story lived on. Ruth told her children of Benjamin's choice, and they told theirs. In 2003, archaeologists found the barn's foundation, uncovering a gold locket with Margaret's initials fused to timber as if placed deliberately. The 1958 ledger discovery and 2007 family testimonies from Samuel's descendant, William Fletcher, revealed the full truth: Margaret's deliberate act, the men's solidarity, and Edmund's monstrous plan. A 2016 historical marker near the site tells a sanitized version, avoiding the darkest details. Visual fades to the soybean field today, quiet under gray sky. This story is a gut punch. If it's made you think about courage, despair, or impossible choices, subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss these truths. Share this with someone who values history's raw reality. In the comments, tell me, was Margaret's final act courage or despair? Did Benjamin, Samuel, and Daniel do right, risking their families? How should we remember those who chose humanity over survival? These choices echo today, reminding us to confront systems of oppression and find ways to resist, even when it seems impossible.